So I just want to work on the natal chart. We'll come back to his history in a minute, but I'm going to mostly work on his natal chart here. Okay. But you always have to do a little preamble, a little bit before a chart. Even if you know somebody's, you still go back and you go through things, you go through steps just to refresh it and bring these things up to the surface. And the more you do it, the more you remember and the more you're able to work with a chart, more consistent you'll be. So we'll start looking. So we have the splash pattern going in all directions of perception on anything. And we had the waning moon, the need to belong or do something meaningful to others or to be receptive. And now we're going to look at the moon. And his moon in Taurus, it's in the third house. And Taurus, determined. Taurus, the third house. Moon, very fixed attitudes of what he thinks he needs or what he wants, very practical, down to earth feelings, physical, tactile person with his knowledge around what's comfortable, what's not, what's healthy, what's not, very tactile, knowing what he wants. It's conjunct to Pluto. That's a difficult, that's the hardest, one of the hardest planets, the outer planet to the most outermost to the inner. It's harsh. There was a harshness around his feelings. There's a harshness around his memories. There's a harshness around the past. He remembers the traumas. He remembers what's real, what's not real. So even in his biography, memories, dreams, and reflection, he's going back and remembering things and discussing his memories. His tendency is to have a very harsh, realistic take, or you could say a psychoanalytical take on the past. What really happened? How it affected? What's happened? What's going on? You can see that sharp Pluto moon in the third house of trying to figure things out. That's trying to figure out family, how to express oneself, what's true, what's not true, what feels right, what doesn't feel right. And he has a very practical, down-to-earth take in his logic, in his feelings. So he can control his feelings and align it, but he has a drive to have to understand them or to align his feelings to a certain understanding. That's strong. That's a stubborn quality. He has his way of interpreting what's real. Now that moon, so that Pluto is the first harsh aspect. Excuse me for 1 minute. Sorry, someone at the door. Okay, 1 second, I have to just pause. It's not correct yet. No, it's the door right up front. I think that's it. Yeah. Or it might be that one. What are you looking for? The nail people? Sorry about that, a little unexpected break. Okay. So following from this sharp moon, it's not something you're going to get sympathy with. You get hugs, you would get touches, but not, there would be concerns or defenses or threats around how close one would get, or need to analyze what's going on, or to think that Pluto would force a depth to maybe even a fear around feelings that would be intolerable to his intelligence. Now that moon also is squared by Saturn. So there's an inherent melancholy or seriousness with the worry that comes from Saturn on the moon. It restricts the feelings. It sensitive father, mother to the place he came from. It never was good. He would get strict habits, strict upbringings. He would have disciplined habits, but he wouldn't. It's just his lifestyle would be controlled, cautious, defensive. His feelings, cautious, defensive. It doesn't mean he wouldn't have kids. He did have kids, 3 kids. But he would still have an aloof or a serious role around this. I don't remember seeing any pictures of him playing with his kids. I'm sure there must be, but generally it was more defensive and control. The family's here, home is here, I live in my castle. Defensive. Cautious feelings. Now that cautious feelings to the moon will make for inhibited, reserved feelings. That inhibited, reserved feelings could go into analysis or inhibited, reserved. Why is this being reserved? Why is this being restricted? Why is this being there? Really Saturn issues. And feeling the weight of the responsibility, weight of authority. At the same time, the moon is squared by Uranus. It's the tightest aspect. So Uranus creates an instability. So the Pluto being with the moon, it also hits the Saturn. So there's the harsh to the Saturn, and they bump. The Pluto hits the Saturn hits the moon. They both pile up on the moon. Then Uranus squares the moon, doesn't square the Pluto. The structures there, but his feelings, that's the neurotic, that's the shocking, that's the disruptive shock. And for a Taurus moon who likes stability and security, how could there be shocks? How could there be this? How could he not be appreciated? How could he not feel secure? So he's defensive by his feelings, but rightly so, because there's a lot of shocks and instabilities or changes that would have happened in his life. So he tends to remember his life, my opinion, more severely than it was. In terms of hardships. Once he was living with his dad, with his family, near in a train station or something, and they got by there. It was a marginal existence. For his sense, it was a marginal existence. That was still it was still a house, a job. There was still security. It was not what you would call exactly poor for his standards. It would have been, but his person likes nice things, but it's challenged around him. So things would have changed in life. Any change, any move, any change would be a big shock to him. It would give him an inherent sense of instability with that moon in Taurus squared by Uranus, that anxiety about change, about what was there, what was lost, what was gained, that nervousness. And it would be controlled by the Saturn. The Saturn in this case would balance it a little bit. One would be anxious, the other would be somewhat inhibited, reserved, or cautious. But both are fairly insecure. And with the Pluto on top of it, would add confrontations or challenges to his feelings. Confronted by family, confronted by mom. Just whenever he wouldn't get what he wanted, there would be a big challenge. And he would want things like Moon in Taurus, but they wouldn't necessarily be there. So the Moon in Taurus with the Leo Sun is kind of like a spoiled kid. Mine, they notice me, I want this. It has both of those two things in spades. But in his situations, it's not a comfort. His moon, trying to understand memories and shocks of the past, it is his process on Pluto, the transformations around it, what it meant, what he grew from it, how he died and was reborn, how he dealt with these things. These are powerful things, but he would have a very fixed nature around who he is. And then when things would change, it would challenge him, and he would get defensive and controlling, even in the midst of these shocks. I guess you could say, even though he was a student of Freud, he had his own take and his own fixed way of interpreting things that was much more saturnine and disruptive than necessarily sexual. The inhibition, the depression, the shocks, in his case, to his security, were about feelings and security and instincts, not so much about passions, or about appreciation, feeling needed or feeling wanted or feeling liked, or being liked and have it taken away, or not being there. So this kind of void or vacuum that has this need to be liked and feeling it's not stable, I'm not being liked, it's not enough. That's That's a very driving mechanism for him to have to understand, to get control, to work with that. And this would feed into his value of being alone, to take care of things, having his own place, and it's secure. But you can certainly see the analyst analyzing things and working through things to understand each change, to get a fixed take on what's happened. This is an afflictive moon. This is a Pluto, Saturn, Uranus, 3 outer planet aspects, all hitting the moon. This is not a comfortable or easy moon or life. And it would only come up whenever anyone would get close to him. If someone got close to him and was expecting him to be different, or would give him energy and then would pull it away, he would have difficulty with it. So he would feel, in having kids, he had his kids, he brought up his kids, he was married his whole life, he got it, that was there. But he married someone who was very well off, who was secure, who would make sure he would be taken care of and his kids were taken care of. And he could be like another kid that would be able to study the things he wanted to study. Okay, I'm just throwing little opinions, my opinions in. Other people could have different takes. It's just my opinion from working with this chart. I've read some of his books. I've been influenced strongly by Jung, but I'm certainly not the scholar of him. You know, like, I know his work with the mystical things, with the I Ching and with astrology, more than the psychological things. Although, how does it not? He has such a prominent role. Okay. Or archetypal role in relation to astrology. But here we're seeing his personal things. So then we look at his Mercury, the way he thinks, and the way he processes, makes sense of things. His Mercury and Venus are conjunct. It's square to Jupiter, but there's no other, there's some minor sesquiquadrate, a semi-square. We're not working with it, just working with the main aspects to look at this. We have the main factors. Mercury, Venus, it adds the ability to express what he likes, to express what he wants, to express his values, to be valued for his expression. These two work together. And they're in Cancer, ruled by the moon. Whoa. So here, I'm thinking, I know what I like, I know what I want, I'm going, this is beautiful, this is the way it is, I like this, this is how I want, this is what appreciation is about. And yet, when he would get it, when it would, by nature, it's pulled in and ruled by his moon, which is, how come I can see these nice things or want these things when things were not so difficult? It's like, I'm lucky to be where I am, I'm lucky to know what I know. I'm trying to figure out what the depth was, what the difficulties were. And I think it comes down to the fear of his mother, who had breakdowns and psychic flashes, and people considered her impaired and not secure. And he had a fear of that and would be generally thinking about it, inherent within his understanding. But the Mercury and Venus aren't afflicted. That's nice. So when he would be talking to someone, people would feel very sympathetic and very supportive. They would feel he's right there with them. So, but there is an irrational, intuitive sense of this being Mercury in Cancer, and of the Venus being there. The Mercury in Cancer adds the moon, or the instincts and the intuitions, to it. And the square to Jupiter exaggerates and puts a struggle to understand, a tendency to exaggerate, and a need to understand the changes of one's understanding. Actually, the Mercury is not hitting the Jupiter, the Venus is, so leave that, it's just Mercury to Venus. So understanding what's valued, what's not, being liked for one's idea, having one's ideas appreciated, this is really important. So the Mercury in Cancer, that intuitive thinker, that sensitive, almost moody thinker, that's the part that was into the Freudian slip and the sudden feelings of certain words coming out, of the synchronicity, of the psychic and the intuitive things. That was the mind that was fascinated with these things.